something about it, right? So you talked about in People Love Dead Jews the kinds of stories that can get made in Hollywood about Jews. Could you talk just a little bit about that and why maybe this show rubs some people the wrong way?
Sure. Well, so I can't comment specifically about the show I haven't seen. It's not really fair. But in the book People Love Dead Jews is basically there's one basic premise to it, which is that Jews are acceptable in a non-Jewish society if they have no power. Generally, if they're politically impotent or dead. Mm-hmm. And to your point about, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. So, I mean, that's why, we love, dead Jews who died in the Holocaust and really super don't like, Jews who have any kind of agency or power.
Oh, the Holocaust movies. What are we going to do?
Yes, exactly.
Help us, please.
Exactly. And so that's like, what's you can make in Hollywood. And I'm not a Hollywood insider or anything like that. I'm not in those conversations. But this is what's acceptable to a broader audience. This is the reason for if you type in Jewish into Netflix, you're going to get, maybe this show, but also like 9 million Holocaust movies, right? That's comfortable for people. Dead Jews, Jews who have no agency and are just, passive victims and are doing nothing. It's also acceptable to be Jewish if you aren't too Jewish, right? If you are not actually claiming like a role in this civilization and a meaningful role in this civilization that wants this civilization to continue. So, this sort of like, even the rabbi is, going off with this, non-Jewish woman and, is having doubts about it. It's like, well, that's an appealing story too, right? Because, the more we have Jews who are not participating in upholding Jewish civilization, that's also more comfortable for people.
Right. So he's a rabbi, but he's also making sure that the civilization is not going to continue.
I mean, basically.
So, right. Okay.
I mean, like I said, I haven't seen this show, but like the cringiness of it also, there's, to me, this plot sounds like all these things from an older generation too.
Yeah. Well,
right? I mean, that sounds so dated, right? I mean, like, why? Like, why are we even...
So the joke there is she's like, oh, like she brings like pork to like a Jewish thing and she's like, oh, I didn't know you guys can eat pork. And it's like, who lives in LA and doesn't know so many Jews that like even meeting a rabbi is some exotic experience?
Yeah, that's a little, yes. But, right, that sort of, exoticizing is part of it too, right? Like, oh, this is something creepy and weird, right? Like, explain how creepy and weird you are, right? I mean, that's a big part of it also.
Well, how do you square the idea that Jews have to be portrayed in this particular way and as weaker or subservient or sort of like going with the flow, but at the same time you'll see people, especially today, saying Jews are overrepresented in Hollywood. The Jewish narrative has been dominant in a certain way, and maybe it's a particular way you're describing it, but if anything, this weird portrayal of Jews as being powerful or being controlling of things. So like, how do you square those two perceptions?
I mean, that's the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that's always been true, right? Is, Jews have too much power, Jews have too much privilege, and Jews are overrepresented, right? I think about this all the time because I often get invited to do these, diversity events for corporations.
Really?
Which is, I mean, it's kind of funny because, the first thing I say when they give me the microphone is like, here's why this structure is a problem for Jews. And, then they generally don't invite me back. But like, what I say is like, if your worldview... Right. Well, I mean, what I say is like if your worldview is that, there's a hierarchy of power in our society and some people, have, too much power and too much privilege or overrepresented and our job is to level the playing field. Like, I mean, I'm not saying there's no merit to that worldview. I mean, I always think it's funny that I'm like, doing a corporate event at Google or Amazon and I'm like, do some people in our society have too much power and too much privilege? I'm like, Google, maybe it's you, right? But then I'm like, the problem is like with that worldview, it's like, if that's your worldview, you're going to fall face first into anti-Semitism. It's almost inevitable because that is this sort of central anti-Semitic concept since ancient times is Jews have too much power, Jews have too much privilege, Jews are overrepresented. And if you think about like how old is that idea, and you might say, oh, it's from the Protocols of the Elders of Zion from 100 years ago. It's like, no, it's in the Torah.
Right.
Right?
So,
like
so you're saying if you view the world through that lens of hierarchies of power ascribed to different groups, you'll arrive at anti-Semitism?
This is coming to this idea that Jews are not allowed to have power, right? And that so this is literally, I mean, when I say it's in the Torah, like, I mean, that's like, why does the Pharaoh enslave the Jews in the book of Exodus? It's like, oh, the Hebrews are too numerous. They might rise up against me, right? I mean, this is exactly that idea, right? I mean, this goes back, and I'm not claiming that Torah, the Exodus story is a historical text, but I mean, this is a very, very ancient idea. And I have a whole theory about why that's there. And we could go into that if you like. Sure. I don't know how long you want to talk about this, but
are other minorities like can you have black characters who are able to who are able to be more specific than Jewish characters are, or is it specific to Jews?
No, I think that there's different problems with other minorities. Okay. Right? I mean, it may not be the same problems. I mean, no, I think that there's problems with stereotypes of minorities all the time in the arts.
Phrase. There's problems with other minorities.
No, I'm not. Well, no, right. Okay, thank you. I don't buy this. No, I mean, I think
it's not the same.
No, there are people like I've sometimes people in the Jewish community will say like, oh, this would never happen with any other minority group. I'm like, no, that's not true. Like all kinds of garbage happens to all kinds of minority groups like that. It might not be exactly the same, right? I mean, there might be a different stereotype or different malicious idea or caricature that another group is dealing with. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, we can get to that as far as like, you mentioned you had like a theory on where this is all like sourced and stemmed from. Because I heard your remarks at an event a few months ago, and one of the things that I found really interesting was,